cookie disappears, or if the IT team changed the web page and suddenly the cookie isn't available anymore. When you agree to respect the header, you really move all of the effort and responsibility for setting and transmitting the header to the browser vendor. It's their problem. They're the ones who have to deal with the FTC if consumers aren't able to set it. This is good. This is a great thing for companies.
Did we even get to what it means to respect the header?
That was the good part. We didn't have to get bogged down in that.
So we hated on the idea that there's an implicit quid pro quo, but we didn't make explicit what the quid pro quo is in the header. Failure of your moderator, once again. Question?
Hi, my name's Deborah. So my question is I think one of the things we're talking about, like economies, regarding like these advertising models and tracking, what is the monetary value of information? Because obviously these advertising models are getting more rich data than they did in the past. And zoom out from computers. Let's forget about computers. I mean, look at other advertising models from like TV to telemarketing. We have do not call. Why? Because one, it impedes on you, it's disturbing. But only that, they're just trying to get information from you so that they can build their marketing database. So if this is, it's the model increasing, but as we say, there is monetary value to that information. So you are giving something that is of value to these advertisers. So should you or should you not be compensated in some way? In the previous models, you were given, I don't know, you were able to get something from it.
But that's the whole point. You are compensated. That's what we were talking about when we were talking about the implicit value exchange. You're getting content and services. I mean, the central challenge that I see that's being ignored here is the dilemma of how you fund media at a time when the internet ruthlessly drives prices to zero and makes it increasingly difficult to actually fund anything. And it's particularly ironic because the FTC itself, and on the other side of the house, has been obsessed with this very question about journalism. And I think there's a bit of a disconnect here, left hand, right hand. The way you square these two things is to recognize that when you empower users on privacy, as I really do believe you should do, you have to keep in mind this dilemma, that the exchange you just asked about is attention and data for content. And if you muck with that exchange, you're going to get less content, less diversity of content. And I don't think that's good for our democracy, to answer the question that was asked earlier.
I think it should be a choice. Isn't that democracy?
We're not going to do debates. We only have
I think also at the end of the day, what it leaves standing is the only source of funding is government funding, which is not good for democracy.
We only have 3 or 4 more minutes, so let's do a lightning round. No, that'll be that.
I'm disturbed that I've heard a number of disingenuous arguments, and I won't run through them.
But Chris is the disingenuous monitor here. Hasn't he done his job?
Well, no. I mean, I've heard a number of arguments for people who should. I mean, there are a number of arguments that have been stated that people who understand the marketplace. It seems to me that a deeper understanding of the marketplace, which I think everybody here has, it's clear that you're arguing in favor of getting what you want rather than making an argument. And the specific thing that I'll bring up, I mean, I have a list, I can't go through them. The specific thing I'll bring up, though, is that we're discussing about, what's the harm of somebody having your address or having small bits of data, whether it's opt-in, opt-out, all these technological issues. And to me, the real harm is the fact that once you have my address, the fact that I took a bus today, that I'm carrying a smartphone, all these individual bits of data, you can then start building psychological profiles and data mine me to build a profile that is far more intrusive than what these small bits of data are. And we know that this is what the marketing companies are doing.
Form of a question,
Okay.
please.
The question is, why are we discussing these individual data bits, and why are we not discussing these massive profiles that 30, 40, 50 pages long that are being built by these third-party companies? Because that, to me, is the real harm, and it's not being addressed by Do Not Track, except to cut off the wellspring. And it's certainly not being discussed by the Boooh side.
Harlan, you're noodling around the edges.
That's a really good point. I think it's it's about these profiles that are being built, not necessarily about the advertising. The advertising is the most conspicuous, the most obvious use of this data, but obviously in the background it's being used in lots of other ways as well that users just never see and can't get outraged about because they don't know that it's there. And I think another point I want to make is that regulating use may not be enough. I mean, I think the collection itself and the building of the dossier is already a problem. I mean, we've seen in the past couple of months, numerous, data breaches and accidental loss. So I think just having rules around, how this information can be used after it's collected may not be enough to protect the consumers from privacy harms.
And these dossiers are not only harmful, they can be hugely beneficial. The public access to credit has been widely democratized over the past few decades because of precisely the dossiers that have been built about individuals' financial history, and that's been on net a wonderful
With the 45 seconds we have remaining, we're going to hear his question, we're going to hear his question, and then everybody's going to speak for 1 second each, and then wrap up.
I have two questions, but I'll only ask one of them.
Thank you.
And I'll ask the one that I think most likely to be answered in an interesting way, which is I haven't really heard very much about. I understand the technology of headers and do not track, but I haven't heard how this becomes something that will meaningfully cut back on tracking. Whether it's through legislation, regulation, industry standards. I haven't really heard that discussed very much, and I'd like that addressed.
It's a good question. Let's hear you two.
Hi, I'm Cliff from Shazzle. On legislation about preventing the government from accessing privately created data banks on citizens, isn't there a risk that if that government turns authoritarian that it won't respect laws, and that's part of the problem? So how do you protect against the government misusing information if you get to the point where that's exactly what the government wants to do? And isn't there a risk of creating, even if they're private data banks, once they exist, isn't that a temptation for the government to overreach?
Two very good questions.
Right, so Google's outside lawyer, Al Gadari, says if you build it, they will come. I mean, he's quoting someone else. But don't collect the data in the first place.
Harlan, answer those two questions in 5 words.
I mean, I agree. Don't collect the data. If it's not there, government can't have access to it.
And you can't lose it.
Maybe it is part of a partial answer to your question. Ed, you got 5 words to wrap this thing up, baby. I just called Ed Felton baby.
Thanks. To me, this discussion is indicative of where the whole debate on this issue is going. It's not about whether consumers should have choice. The debate is moving to how best to provide that choice for consumers. If a consumer wants to protect themselves from tracking, let them do it. But now let's talk about how that should be done.
Andy, honey? Choice, yay. Choice, yay. Very nice. Berin.
Empowerment, education, enforcement of existing laws, erecting a higher wall of separation between government and privately stored data, and taking enforcement seriously and enhancing self-regulation in the broad sense that I mean it, of how companies respect the header, how companies perform their data practices, and also expecting that the do not track mechanism will lead to better data practices because, again, companies, what I met before, EFF can come up with a list of companies that have good data practices and they won't get blocked. That's a useful way to improve the marketplace.
Ryan.
Government is much, much better at tracking us than stopping us from being tracked.
During the lunch hour, there are a couple of great sessions you'll want to check out in Room A: Youth, Privacy, and Freedom: Using Libraries to Engage Young People. In Room B, Meet the Robins versus Lower Merion School District. And then we'll be back here at 2 o'clock for a session that should be great entertainment and education. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to my panel, Chris Szogoian, Harlan.